Most of the trade talk among Chicago Bears fans has been about DJ Moore, but Cole Kmet is the trade that makes more sense and sounds more realistic.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. On the show today, we're going to talk about Cole Kmet as a Chicago Bears trade target and why, or I guess trade candidate, and why he might make more sense and should be getting more of the attention than DJ Moore, who's really been the focus of a lot of these conversations. We'll hear Cole Kmet's own thoughts on the situation, which sounds like someone who's realistic and facing this as a real possibility for himself this offseason, certainly not in denial about it by any means. And we'll take a look at, why that might make more sense for the Bears and might be more realistic to pull off overall. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's the last call for football on FanDuel, so if you're a new customer, you can bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. But what's really stirring this conversation about Cole Kmet as a trade candidate is he himself commenting on the idea of him being a trade candidate. And full credit to the folks over at The Score, WSCR Radio in Chicago. I think they just launched an FM dial on 104.5. Now, it was always 670 The Score. I'm still learning what the FM dial is. But nonetheless, as part of the Super Bowl pre-festivities where seemingly every player in the media is available for interviews, Cole Kmet was one of those. And he was on one of their shows over at The Score and was kind of asked just straight up, like, how do you as a veteran player deal with it when you hear trade rumors for a teammate like DJ Moore or even trade rumors for a player like yourself? And the candidness with which he answered surprised me, and I think said a lot. Because it's one thing to say, it's one thing for a player to come out and say, oh, well, yeah, that's all noise on the outside that we don't really pay attention to, and I'm fully confident or whatever, and we're just gonna go full speed ahead. But he was a lot more vulnerable, I guess. Like the exact way the question ends, and I'm not going to pull the audio here, but I'll read you the quotes that Kmet said was like, but the question was like, do you hear that stuff? Is that kind of trade rumor stuff real? And Cole Kmet's answer was, quote, well, it definitely is very real. I know it's real because I've seen it happen before. I mean, that's just the nature of the business of this league. He goes on to say, I think at this point in this stage of my career, you're just kind of accepting of it and understanding it's just part of the deal. And especially like a guy like myself, or you're talking about like DJ Moore, other guys who have played a little bit and you're on a second deal. Unfortunately, as you age, you get more expensive and you may not fit as a piece of the puzzle that I was talking about. That's just the nature of the business. And however it works out, it works out. For me personally, I felt like I did a lot of good things this year in the role that I was in and had a lot of fun playing with this team. And like I said after the game with the Rams, it's going to be different next year despite who's here. But I think going forward, this is an organization that you would want to be a part of. And it's just strangely specific language that like doesn't automatically assume Cole Kmet's going to be back next year. And it's coming from Cole Kmet. Like, it's one thing for us on the outside to kind of speculate about it, but for him to kind of acknowledge, like, yeah, trades happen, and, I'm essentially saying I'm getting more expensive. I'm getting older. I mean, he's 27. He's not old, but he's in the prime of his career. But, like, acknowledging, like, you may not fit as a piece of the puzzle. Like, him saying that out loud and giving that is so uncommon. And that's what really struck me here. It's like, it feels like an acknowledgement, not, oh yeah, I know for sure I'm going to be traded, but more like, oh yeah, I know a trade is a real possibility here, and I've known this has been coming since they drafted Colston Loveland. I mean, realistically, the day they drafted Colston Loveland in the first round last year started a clock ticking down for Cole Kmet's departure from the Chicago Bears. From the moment he was drafted, it was instant conversation. There was talk, I don't think it had any legs, but Bears fans were already talking last year about after drafting Loveland, were they going to trade Kmet before this past season? Just move on from that early. Then the question is, do they do it now this current 2026 offseason, or do they hold on to him for one more year? Because it feels like at the very latest, next offseason is probably when Cole Kmet likely moves on as Colston Loveland grows into an even bigger and bigger role in this offense. But he's much more accepting of that possibility right now. And I think part of that is that you felt that power dynamic at tight end and that role shift as the season went on, where, of course, early in the year, Cole Kmet was clearly your number one tight end. But as the season went on, you could see Cole Kmet's playing time diminish a little bit, and it didn't help that he got hurt and missed, I think, week 7 or week 8. I think he got hurt in week 7 and then missed week 8. But sometime, middle of the season there, he was a little bit banged up, which put Cole Kmet or put Colston Loveland in the unencumbered driver's seat there. But even after he came back from the injury, he still had a pretty prominent role in this offense, but Loveland kept kind of creeping up more and more. And by the time we got to the final couple games of the regular season and into the playoffs, it really kind of felt like Colston Loveland had taken over as the number one tight end. The snap counts for each player kind of reflect that, although I will say it seemed to be a little bit game plan dependent, and you might be surprised to know that, say, in the final playoff game against the Rams in the divisional round, Cole Kmet played more snaps than Colston Loveland in that game. Like, there were certain matchups, I think, where they wanted more inline tight end Cole Kmet blocking than Colston Loveland splitting on a receiver a little bit more. In other matchups where it just kind of depended on the game. And in some games, both tight ends played a ton, and in some games, both tight ends played less than normal. Like, sometimes their fluctuations matched each other. It wasn't always like Kmet and Loveland competing for the same snaps, but just some games they'd use two tight ends a lot more, and sometimes they just wouldn't use either one as much because they'd use the wide receivers more. So it's not like a clear delineation of like, oh, starting in week 13, Colston Loveland took over or whatever. Like, there was definitely some back and forth there, but you could kind of see the trends shift there, and especially later in the season, Loveland being that go-to guy, especially in terms of targets, not just playing time down the stretch there. So Kmet's smart enough to see that, recognize that, feel that, and still be a good teammate throughout the process, but kind of know, hey, wait a minute, I'm no longer really the top tight end in Chicago. I think I don't think that's a controversial thing. Colston Loveland is the number one tight end in Chicago in 2026. And Cole Kmet's smart enough to know, okay, I also recognize that Cole Kmet, am making $11.6 million in 2026 to be functionally the number 2 tight end. Now, maybe in this Bears offense, a number 2 tight end is more valuable than in other offenses comparatively, so that $12.5 million on a per year basis, and I think the 11.6 cap hit this season is perhaps more worth it to the Bears as a number 2 tight end than other teams, but might not be fully worth it to the Bears. And that maybe that's a role where the Bears say, hey, we don't necessarily need a Cole Kmet caliber player in that spot, or that expensive a player. Could we get by with a lesser player there and then use that salary cap space elsewhere? I think it's a real conversation they're having at Hallis Hall. And I think it should start in the same place as the DJ Moore conversation. We talked about it last week on the podcast in depth of like, you're not trading DJ Moore or Cole Kmet just for the salary cap savings, right? You're not trading him just because, well, we've got to get rid of this guy. Like, if you get rid of Cole Kmet, your offense instantly gets worse, right? That trade worsens your offense. So you're only trading Cole Kmet or DJ Moore for something that makes your team better as a whole. Like, I'm not just going to trade away Cole Kmet for a second round pick or whatever because, I want a draft pick and I want to save some salary cap space. Like, much like DJ Moore, I'm only trading Cole Kmet if I'm getting a player that upgrades my team today in return. I'm packaging Cole Kmet for a pass rusher. I'm packaging Cole Kmet, for a safety, a linebacker, whatever it might be, a left tackle, however the Bears want to upgrade the roster in some way, shape, or form so that whatever you lose by moving on from Kmet, you replace and gain a net positive in the deal. But otherwise, I'm not just trading him willy-nilly for the sake of trading him. Otherwise, keep him. He makes your team better when he's on the roster. But it just feels like he's even more expendable to the Bears than DJ Moore. So I want to take a look at how this tight end position has worked in the Bears offense and what that sort of where Ben Johnson's philosophies fit in this compared to what he's had in the past. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Gusto. Let's be real. No one starts a business for the joy of calculating tax withholdings or managing payroll spreadsheets. Well, that's where Gusto comes in, to take the stress out of payroll, benefits, and HR so you can focus on running your business and supporting your team. Gusto is the all-in-one remote-friendly payroll and HR platform that makes managing your team simple, transparent, and fast. Whether you're hiring, onboarding, or just paying your employees, Gusto helps you do it all from one place without the hassle or hidden fees. They give you unlimited payroll runs for one monthly price, which means no surprise charges at the end of each month. And they give you access to certified HR experts anytime that give you real peace of mind. So try Gusto today at gusto.com/lockedonnfl and get 3 months free when you run your first payroll. That's right, 3 months of free payroll at gusto.com/lockedonnfl. One more time, that's GUSTO. gusto.com/lockedonnfl. The Locked On Bears podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff, the final chance to get in on all the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. Because this is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorite, riding with the underdog, or building one last same-game parlay, this is the game everyone's been waiting for, where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's the perfect way to cap off the offseason and make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to final whistle. If you're a new customer, you can bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win that first bet. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the football season's over. So last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. I do want to thank you again for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We really appreciate all of you that tune in, whether it's 1 day a week or 5 days a week. Anytime you make us a part of your day, I really do appreciate it. That's what we do it for, not just talking here to myself for no reason. And if you want to take your listening to the next level, you can always check out the Locked On Bears Everydayers Club, where you're going to get access to an ad-free audio feed of Locked On Bears. It's compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or all the major podcasting apps, plus access to a Locked On Bears exclusive group chat for listeners of this show and the Locked On Everydayers Club Discord server. If you want to check it out, go to lockedonbears.supercast.com. You can find that link in the show notes description, however you're tuning into the podcast. But I can't help but look at how the Bears utilize tight ends, how Ben Johnson has utilized tight ends, and feel like this is the trade that makes more sense than DJ Moore by comparison. That, we talked about how Loveland is already surpassing Cole Kmet in terms of the number one tight end and in terms of the role and the playing time on this Bears offense. And as much as Ben Johnson utilizes 2 and even 3 tight ends as much as anybody in football, that second tight end is still not nearly as important as, say, the number 3 wide receiver by comparison. So when you're thinking about, well, at wide receiver, you've got the big 3 of Moore, Odunze, and Burden. Maybe you could sacrifice Moore as one of those guys that you could trade, or you got the big 2 tight ends in Loveland and Kmet, or you could sacrifice one of those. Like, would I rather have, and would Ben Johnson rather have 3 good wide receivers and 1 good tight end, or 2 good wide receivers and 2 good tight ends? And I think the playing time usage over the course of this season and some of Ben Johnson's history as well leans to the fact that I think he'd be better off keeping DJ Moore than keeping Cole Kmet if the thought is, well, one or the other would get traded this offseason. Because when you look even this past season, when you had Loveland and Kmet in the same offense, perhaps the best tight end duo Ben Johnson has ever had in his NFL career, they still used 3 wide receiver sets more than 2 tight end sets, 2 or 3 tight end sets. Like, there were 3 wide receivers on the field more often than there were multiple tight ends on the field. If you look over the course of the season as a whole, the Bears used three wide receivers, 11 personnel, as they call it, on 51.5% of their offensive plays. Where three wide receivers, any combination of three wide receivers, any one tight end, and any one running back that was the primary offensive personnel the Bears used. It's the primary offensive personnel every team uses in the modern NFL. And the Bears use less of it than a lot of other teams, but it still dwarfs the amount of multi-tight end sets. Two tight ends were about 33%, about a third of the Bears' offensive snaps had two tight ends, and that's any combination of two tight ends, not just Loveland and Kmet, but Durham Smythe and even Theo Bennett in as a tight end, like two tight end sets in general. With, I should specify then, I guess, two wide receivers and two tight ends and one running back was about a third of the Bears snaps, and then the three tight end sets with one wide receiver, one running back, and all three tight ends on the field was about 11.5% of the Bears snaps. So even if you add the two tight end and the three tight end snaps together, it's about 45% of the snaps compared to those three wide receiver sets were 51%. Like the number three receiver in this offense, whether it was Olamide Zaccheaus or Luther Burden, depending on the game, right? They combined to play a bigger role in the Bears offense than the number two tight end role. And it doesn't work math-wise to just look at like Cole Kmet's total snaps and Colston Loveland's total snaps and the receiver total snaps, because Kmet and Loveland split time as the number one and the number two. So yes, both of those guys played more total snaps than the Bears' number three receivers because they also split time, right? It's not an even apples to apples comparison, but the point being, like, Ben Johnson leans on having three wide receivers more than he leans on having multiple tight ends, because you can add in, they used four receivers on about 2% of their snaps this season, and they used, three receivers and two tight ends on about 1% of their snaps. Like, there's some variations in there, but like primarily this is still a three wide receiver offense. And they are secondarily a multi-tight end offense. They're primarily a one tight end offense. And so if you had to subtract either one of your really good tight ends or one of your really good wide receivers, based on how the offensive personnel is used, you would miss more by losing the wide receiver than you would by losing the tight end. It's closer in Ben Johnson's offense than in most other offenses around the NFL, and it's why it made sense to draft Colston Loveland and keep Cole Kmet and have them both be a part of the offense, and why it makes sense to not trade Cole Kmet either. Like, there's a reality here where you don't trade Moore or Kmet, but I think if you're going into the offseason saying we may include one in a trade for a player or something, Kmet is the loss that I think is easier to absorb in terms of how often they're used in the Bears offense. You combine that with Ben Johnson's recent history in Detroit. Of course, he had Sam Laporta, who compares very favorably to Colston Loveland, but Ben Johnson never had a particularly dynamic or special or even notable number two tight end in his Lions offenses, and still used multiple tight ends a lot and had a lot of success with those offenses. Like, each of the last 4 seasons in Detroit, their number two tight end, we've talked about him a little bit on this podcast, was Brock Wright, who is built like Cole Kmet and went to Notre Dame, but was like notably an undrafted free agent out of Notre Dame who came into their offense and definitely outplayed his draft status. I'm not trying to say Brock Wright is a total bum who has no skills as an NFL player, but the point being, Ben Johnson took an undrafted free agent off the street, made him their number two tight end, and did just fine with it. Like, clearly, Brock Wright is multiple tiers below Cole Kmet in the tight end ranking, right? Like, Cole Kmet's a good tight end. He's much better than Brock Wright. And yet, Ben Johnson's offenses were just fine with a very average, no-name number two tight end. They're better when it's Cole Kmet, but you've seen this offense get by just fine with one really good tight end and not much else at the position. So I have a lot of confidence in Ben Johnson to say, get rid of Cole Kmet, find whether it's a free agent or a draft pick, a late round draft pick or a cheap free agent replacement that can, get the job done and give you something that is a Brock Wright equivalent for the Bears offense and be just fine. Whereas I think, yes, could he be fine without DJ Moore? Sure. But I think it's easier for him to replace Cole Kmet with an average replacement player than it is to replace DJ Moore with an average replacement player. Like, I just think there's a lot more of those, of the Brock Wright caliber players to replace Kmet with than there are DJ Moore, like players to replace DJ Moore's impact on this offense. You can find veteran number 2 tight ends. I just look, like, if I glance at free agency, right, I think about David Njoku's a free agent. Austin Hooper is a free agent. An aging Zach Ertz is a free agent. Adam Trautman from the Broncos is a free agent. Dallas Goedert set to be a free agent. Mo Alley Cox from the Colts would be a perfect number 2. Austin Hooper from the Patriots. Like, there's a bunch of guys here that none of them are as good as Cole Kmet, for sure. But they're good enough to be number 2 tight ends in the offenses of Ben Johnson we've seen in the past. So, like, I think it makes a little sense. And then you add in the financial benefits, and it starts to make even more sense, especially like when you compare what other teams are doing at tight end. There's not many teams that have as much invested at that position right now as the Bears. That might make more sense to say, yeah, that's where you want to tone down your investment because you've already got a lot put into that position. So we'll compare the Bears tight ends to other teams that also have put a lot at tight end, and where Chicago is, I think, even more than pretty much everybody else. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is sponsored by Betterhelp. February can be a lot. Flowers, candy, stuffed animals, and so much talk about relationships. And honestly, it can feel like everyone else has it all together in their love lives. But here's the truth. Whether you're married, dating, single, or just focusing on you, most people are still figuring it out. And no matter where you are in your romantic journey, therapy can help you find your way. It can help you get clear on what you want, what feels heavy, and how to take some pressure off of yourself. Because it's so easy to assume everyone else has the perfect relationship, but most people are working through something. And therapy can help you recognize patterns that might be weighing relationships down, help you communicate better, set healthier boundaries, and stop carrying everything alone. BetterHelp has licensed therapists in the U.S., and they do the initial matching work for you so you can focus on your goals. And if you want to switch therapists, you can do that at any time. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's BETTERHELP. betterhelp.com/lockedon. The Locked On Bears podcast is also brought to you by TurboTax. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or the guesswork. So instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect online, and they'll handle everything from W-2s to self-employed forms and work to get you every deduction. It's a huge time saver, and it gives you real peace of mind knowing an expert is handling it. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in if a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year. Just make sure to file by February 28th. Take taxes off of your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. Between the first-round pick the Bears spent on Colson Loveland and the large contract the Bears gave to Cole Kmet, they now have a lot invested in the tight end position. And that's okay because they're getting a lot out of the tight end position. But compared to some other teams in the NFL, they're right at the front of the pack. And that's the kind of thing that makes it feel more likely that that would be the position they move on from. Like, comparatively at wide receiver, plenty of teams invest plenty at wide receiver. When you think about DJ Moore, he's got a big contract plus a first-round pick in Rome Odunze and a second-round pick in Luther Burden. It's like, yeah, they do have a lot invested at wide receiver as well, but we've seen plenty of teams be willing to pay multiple wide receivers big money and throw in draft picks there. That's a premium position that everyone throws a lot of bodies at, or tries to at least throw a lot of bodies at. I think about the Cincinnati Bengals paying Jamar Chase and T. Higgins huge money there and still trying to add at wide receiver. Think about the Lions with Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams on big contracts there that they used big draft picks for. Like, that's a position the teams are willing to pay and overpay and get a lot at. Tight end, not so much. A lot rarer for teams to invest in multiple guys, right? Plenty of teams will spend big on the big tight end, right? George Kittle, Trey McBride, Travis Kelce. The Vikings trade for TJ Hawkinson from the Lions, of all teams, I should say. You know, like, teams will put some money in that position and say, all right, we've got our number one tight end. And then you kind of cheap out on the rest. Like I think about even Sam Laporta in Detroit, right? High draft pick. He hasn't gotten the big contract yet, I don't think, but like he is still, the big investment. And then, okay, that position is handed off. Like most teams get the one guy they really like, and then they kind of just fill in the rest with cheaper, lower caliber talent. The two main exceptions here are, well, I guess three when you include the Chicago Bears, who have a first-round pick in Colston Loveland and then a $12.5 million a year tight end in Cole Kmet, who is the 7th highest paid, tied for the 7th highest paid tight end in the NFL on his current contract on a per-year salary basis. As other tight ends get new deals, that could push him down, but still, he's a top 10 highest paid tight end in football. And he is clearly now the Bears' number 2. No other team is paying their second tight end as much as Cole Kmet. But one team comes really close, and a second team is a little bit farther behind, but also in that vicinity. So while the Bears have a first-round pick and a $12 million tight end, the Pittsburgh Steelers this past year traded Minkah Fitzpatrick to the Miami Dolphins and added Jonnu Smith to pair with Pat Freiermuth. And both Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth are both making $12 million a year on their contract. They are the most expensive in terms of salary cap space tight end duo in the NFL. And we know Arthur Smith, their offensive coordinator last year, big tight end guy, wanted two great tight ends. That was a big emphasis and an intentional move for them to have two big, expensive tight ends. Will they continue to have both big, expensive tight ends for the long-term future? We'll see. I mean, Jonnu Smith is entering the last year of his contract. Freiermuth has a couple more years under the belt there. But either one is a contract they could get out of and save some salary cap space. So we'll see if they choose to make one of those guys a potential cap casualty. But sure, that's the team. That's a little bit more the exception to the rule. The other one I'll throw in here that's in the same category is the New Orleans Saints. They have Juwan Johnson that they just signed to a $10 million a year deal. Taysom Hill is also on a $10 million a year deal, but Hill is a little bit more of an exception because he does the quarterback stuff and the wildcat stuff and does some running back type of roles in that offense. But he also is entering free agency this year. So they have to either give him a contract extension or, restructure the deal or whatever. But he will no longer be making that much money. So those are the only two teams that have multiple tight ends making any kind of significant money on their contracts right now. Other than that, it's the Bears. No other team is paying their number 2 tight end as much as the Bears are. Even the Ravens, Mark Andrews is still the number 1, but Isaiah Likely's on his rookie contract. They have 2 really good tight ends and have invested a lot in tight ends, but the starter is still the one getting all the money, and the backup is still the one on a rookie contract. That's no longer the case in Chicago, and so you wonder if Ryan Poles and company are going to be willing to have their number 2 tight end, their literal quote-unquote backup, even if he plays a big role, counting $11.6 million against the salary cap this season. Before you get to free agency or anything, Cole Kmet is going to be the 11th, 11th highest paid Bears player this season as your number 2 tight end. Yes, it is reductionist to just keep calling him the number 2 tight end like this. That's a rhetorical trick I'm doing here. It's probably better to call him the number 5 weapon in the offense. If in some order it's Moore, Odunze, Burden, Loveland, 1 through 4, and then Kmet's probably 5, DeAndre Swift 6, or is DeAndre Swift 5 and Kmet 6? Which one makes you feel better? Calling him the number 2 tight end or the number 5 or number 6 weapon on offense? Either way, he's the 11th highest paid player in terms of salary cap hit on your team this year. That's a lot of money to invest in a player whose role is relatively that small. DJ Moore is your most expensive player, but at least he's your number 1 wide receiver. Led your wide receivers in terms of a bunch of statistical categories consistently over his career. Has always been a reliable player. And I'm not even here to be the biggest DJ Moore supporter, but was leader in catches, yards, and tied for touchdowns this season for Bears wide receivers. Odunze had more targets. Odunze also missed 5 games. Yes, etc. There's caveats there, but still, DJ Moore's super high paid, but has a highly paid role. Cole Kmet is highly paid, but is shrinking to a role that is not as highly paid. So I will be really curious to see how aggressive Ryan Poles is about moving Kmet this offseason. Again, I still wouldn't be eager to trade him. I think moving on from Cole Kmet makes your offense worse. You can afford him right now, so keep him on the roster. Well, as well, if you were really drowning in salary cap space, you just needed to clear a bunch of room, I guess I would get it. But like, the Bears can create salary cap in much easier ways, starting with probably Tremaine Edmonds at linebacker and some other potential restructures in there than intentionally making your offense a lot worse by moving on from Cole Kmet. I'm not gonna say it's not gonna happen, because the way we heard Cole Kmet talk about it at the top of the segment or the top of the show, that sounded like someone who's bracing for that being a potential reality. But I don't think the Bears are going to be eager to trade Cole Kmet, just like I don't think they're going to be eager to trade DJ Moore. If they do make any kind of blockbuster trades, or we get any kind of updates on their trade status, you can be sure we'll break it down for you right here in the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. Part of that Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're keeping you up to date on all the Bears trade rumors, free agent news, draft analysis, you name it. We'll be here all offseason, 5 days a week. Join that Everydayers Club if you want the ad-free audio feed at lockedonbears.supercast.com. But otherwise, just keep tuning in the same way you always do. We'll always be free and available on every platform. And make sure that each and every episode that you tune in, you're going to get another opportunity to bear down.